Attention, please. Air raid alert was issued. Please take shelter.
The danger is ever present.
Air raid alert. Proceed to the nearest shelter.
Daily life disrupted by air raid sirens.
Yeah, it was not false alarm. It was a cruise ballistic missile that was launched toward to the city center.
The constant threat of Russian bombs, missiles, and drones firing in the sky.
This is an apartment building that was bombed 4 months ago. People died. They lost their lives here.
Life in Ukraine was upended 1,000 days ago by the Russian invasion.
You know, these weren't all old people that died here. You know, they were young families and kids.
Bringing with it bombed-out buildings.
Could you imagine if you would be one of these rooms that it was completely destroyed?
Broken homes, burned-out cars, and shattered lives.
And everyone has a story. Everybody's lost somebody.
Yet some Colorado volunteers and their counterparts are willingly entering the war zone now on a mission to help make life better for Ukrainians whose communities are now occupied by enemy troops.
He was shot by drone.
People forced from their homes
What dose of pathophysiology on?
with nowhere else to turn.
They've lost family members to the war. They have people on the front lines.
Right now, we're going inside the war zone with them to find out firsthand how everyday Coloradans are making a difference in Ukraine after 1,000 days of war.
Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Jeremy Hubbard, coming to you from Cherkasy, Ukraine. It's a town about 2 hours outside Kyiv, a town where the impacts of the nearly 3-year-long war with Russia are being felt every day, whether it's being awakened to the sound of air raid warnings beeping on your cell phone yet again, or trying to help some of the 30,000 refugees who've been forced to move here, displaced Ukrainians with nowhere to go, forced from their homes by the Russians. We've come here with a nonprofit, including some Denver volunteers who want to do what they can to help. They're medical professionals who understand the need here and feel called to come. From the minute we entered Kyiv late on a Tuesday night in mid-November, it was clear this is still very much a war zone.
Who knows when this will be repaired? Who knows where these displaced people are?
That's Roxanne Alexander Jones, a registered nurse and one of the team members from Global Care Force, the nonprofit we traveled to Ukraine with.
The threat is real, and it's 24/7. You never know.
How real is the threat? Well, during the 1 week we were in Ukraine, between November 11th and the 17th, Russia launched more than 900 aerial bombs, more than 600 combat drones, and nearly 140 missiles, according to Ukraine's government. Some of them deadly, including this one that killed a mother and her 3 young children.
Why this one? Who knows?
She has seen this kind of destruction time after time on her 15 visits to Ukraine since the war began.
Attention, please. Air raid alert was issued. Please take shelter.
The next morning, we awakened to an air raid alert at our hotel and the news this Russian drone has just been shot down right outside town.
Nobody was hurt seriously or injured, but we'll know in a couple hours, we'll know the situations if we have any damage.
For Lev Prestapuk, the nonprofit's medical leader on the ground here in Ukraine, it is an everyday reality.
So because of the air raid, it's making us go a different route?
Yes.
Okay, wow. So it really does change everyday life around here?
Yes, and it's quite complicated.
He gives us a grim tour of the parts of this city in ruins, like the Kyiv Children's Hospital, still in rubble today. After this explosion back in July, caught on camera. This business center bearing the scabs of a Russian missile strike from last December on one of the most brutal nights of the war yet. On the outskirts of town, this automotive graveyard, a pile of hundreds of abandoned and destroyed cars, many of them from families trying to escape Russian troops. Some of them died in their vehicles as they desperately tried to get away. As we drive outside Kyiv, we pass this military cemetery. Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers killed in combat, buried under a canopy of flags and flowers. Some died so recently they still don't have permanent headstones. Their graves so new, they're just fresh piles of dirt.
Flags is meaning that it was recently buried soldier, and what you saw the new grave, it's meaning that it was couple, not months, it's couple weeks could be. Was buried, unfortunately.
The brutality of the war is the backdrop for Lev's mission here.
Вітаємо. Ми зараз до вас зайдемо.
And the mission of his group of volunteers who've come here to provide medical care for everyday Ukrainians forced from their homes.
For the vertigo, we can search on some of the beta histine.
Month after month since the war began, Global Care Force has been sending doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals to villages across Ukraine. Villages filled with refugees from towns now occupied by Russian troops, people in desperate need of help.
Have her, can you shorty or explain the Epley maneuver?
These clinics staffed by volunteers who've come here on their own time and often their own dime. Each of them raising about $6,000 to cover their travel costs and the cost of medicine and other expenses needed to set up these makeshift doctors' offices.
And any associated symptoms with it, any nausea, vomiting?
Where physician assistant Doug Amos of Castle Rock, Colorado, is hard at work.
How long ago was the ultrasound?
He says even though many of these folks have physical issues, it's often the underlying stress that is making things worse.
You know, stress-related issues, a lot of reflux, heartburn, insomnia. We're lucky enough to have a trauma team with a psychiatrist that's able to speak with these patients and be able to find stress relaxation techniques.
But they're away from home, they lost their homes, they probably still have loved ones that are at risk. So, they've got all the reason in the world to be anxious and depressed.
For these volunteers, just getting to Ukraine is a big challenge, as we found out firsthand. You can't fly into the city, the airport's closed, so you have to make your way to the closest international border, here in the town of Przemysl, Poland. The very train station tens of thousands of refugees fled Ukraine through at the start of the war.
The journey for us on this day begins here at the Passport Control Office on the Poland-Ukraine border. They'll check our passports and then we'll get on that long train ride into Kyiv. Should take about 12 hours and we'll pass through a lot of towns that you might remember from the news, places like Lviv that were blown apart in the early days of the war. They've tried to rebuild, but there's still so much work to be done here.
With a half-day-long train ride ahead of us, Roxanne and Scott Oberkrom, who runs Global Care Force, tell us how struck they are that so many medical professionals are willing and ready to go to a war zone and help out.
It's overwhelming to see it happen over and over again, month in, month out. There's always people raise their hands saying, I'm ready to go, I want to go.
And how they're helping Ukrainians in immeasurable ways.
The trauma that people have experienced, they are not able to verbalize or they haven't felt like they could. And so I'm very grateful that every month we have trauma care services available. They're invisible wounds, you don't see them, but you see them with the hypertension and the blood sugars and the PTSD and lack of sleep and pain. The pain levels are off the charts.
We witnessed that impact firsthand at this clinic in Cherkasy, where we meet this young woman carrying a baby.
And when we cross this road, it was a heavy shelling starting.
She tells Lev she escaped Russian forces in Lugansk while she was pregnant. Now she has this new baby with her and a 14-year-old daughter with family still in the war zone.
And the people are dying and killing by shooting by any kinds of machine guns.
With nowhere else to turn and no doctors to take care of her, she came here for a medical checkup.
We saw a number of women with children. We've heard stories for over 2 years now of how people come into the clinic, they're just kind of curious. They're not sure what they're going to experience. Very solemn looks on their faces. And by the time they go through, they're relaxed. You can see the shoulders have dropped. You can see maybe a smile on their face. There may be a little bit more of a optimistic look on their face.
Word spreads quickly among those displaced by the war that if you come see these volunteers, they'll help.
Even if the war would stop tomorrow, the need is still great because people are still displaced.
From the old to the very young, there is so much uncertainty. But if these people can live year-round with the constant threat of missiles and drones and bombs, then for those Colorado volunteers and all their counterparts at Global Care Force, a few days in the danger zone seems like little more than an inconvenience.
I couldn't be happier. I can only do as much as I'm able to do, and I wish I could do more.
Perhaps the most reassuring thing about the clinic they established here in Cherkasy and the other ones around the countryside is the knowledge among the patients that these folks will be back to help them in just a few weeks, at a time when it feels like nobody else is.
Still to come, meet the Ukrainian soldier who was wounded in a Russian drone attack.
And one of the bullet was hit his back here.
Shot while escaping his burning vehicle. the long road to recovery when our Fox 31 News special continues right after this.
As the war in Ukraine drags on past 1,000 days, we've traveled here from Colorado to profile the work of our hometown medical volunteers who've signed up with a nonprofit called Global Care Force and traveled nearly 6,000 miles into a war zone.
And what is the day of the week today?
To provide health care and hope to Ukrainians displaced by the war.
How long have you had the problem with the hearing loss?
Besides the healing a body, the healing their souls.
Between clinic visits, our guide, Lev Prestapyuk, medical director for Global Care Force, shows us around this town, about 2.5 hours south of Kyiv on the Dnipro River, where it is easy to notice the ravages of war.
Yeah, everywhere you look, there are daily reminders of the war here in Ukraine. This is actually a hotel in Cherkasky. 19 people were injured when a missile targeted this building. Thankfully, nobody died. But it just reminds you, as the skeletons exposed here, that a missile could strike at any moment and any number of people could be injured or killed.
It was one of the heavy rocket attacks all over Ukraine. And one of the rockets, by purpose, was launched and hit here.
What's striking is the contrast between this hotel, blasted apart by the Russians, and the sidewalk just out front, where Ukrainians go about their daily business as if numb to the broken bricks and twisted metal just a few feet away.
Could you imagine if you would be one of these rooms that it was completely destroyed?
In front of the mangled building, these stone slabs that used to be the foundations of small shops on the sidewalk until that missile attack.
The plan is to reconstruct it and rebuild hotel because the people from villages who come in here and sell their products, they need this hotel and they need to stay.
Our next stop is this rehabilitation hospital, a Soviet-era building where the halls are darkened in an effort to save electricity, because Russian attacks have obliterated much of this country's ability to produce power.
All of them, they're soldiers.
In this room, we find care specialists treating Ukrainian soldiers injured in the war.
He was shot by drone.
Including this man who was wounded in combat behind enemy lines in Kursk, Russia, just weeks ago, as Ukraine fought back against its invaders. His vehicle was targeted by a Russian drone.
He go out from car and started moving to forest, but the enemies started shooting to them, and one of the bullet was hit his back here.
Doctors had to take that bullet to the back out the front. The fact that he made it out alive at all is a miracle. He spent hours crawling through a minefield.
He used his hand and started just only move on the ground during the night on the minefield, just go towards to the village because he understood that he will be killed.
This soldier is a paratrooper. He was wounded jumping out of an airplane.
Можете, будь ласка, представитись, сказати, звідки ви, що з вами трапилося?
He's already had surgery on one knee. The next operation's coming soon.
Ви в армії з березня 2024 року. He in military service since March 2024.
They are not the first and certainly won't be the last. The walls of this clinic room covered in the patches of those who've been treated here before. This one with a message for the doctors, nurses, and specialists who treated him. Always thank you.
І ви бачите, як ви воюєте.
And speaking of gratitude, when this rehab therapist learned we were from America, he had some words he wanted to share.
Arkady would like to give some message to American people.
Ми вдячні за ту підтримку, ми вдячні за все те, що робиться для нас.
We are very thankful for all the support, for assistance, for and everything was doing for us.
Whether treating those wounded on the battlefield or those whose lives have been shattered by 1,000 days of war.
Has she had problems feeling depression?
Taking care of these people is clearly a team effort.
I got into medicine to be able to take care of people in need. It is a great fit. It's a calling. You know, it really is. It's just a joy to be able to actually go and kind of give back to patients in this way, in a very direct, tactile way.
Straight ahead, the Ukrainian medical professionals working alongside these Colorado volunteers. What's next for them? Could they soon find themselves on the front lines too? How they're coping with the uncertainty of everyday life after 1,000 days of war. when we continue.
Attention. Air raid alert. Proceed to the nearest shelter.
As we prepare to drive out of Kyiv on this Friday morning in November, cell phones begin pinging once again. A phone app warning the team from Global Care Force the threat of an aerial assault by Russia has been detected.
You could see that it was jets on the fight positions. Here it was air raid, and they potentially could launch ballistic missiles.
But soon the welcome news, all clear.
Attention. The air alert is over.
That constant uncertainty is the reality of daily life here in Ukraine. And for men around the age of Lev Prestapyuk, there is an added uncertainty. He could be called into military service and sent to battle.
Basically, you have to check in with the government every 6 months to see whether they need you to go fight, right?
Yes, all of the males, years 18 and 60 years old, need to be registered in the military office. As I'm a physician and I work in critical institutions and providing medical care, at this moment I'm not seen up, but every 6 months I'm showing up, and they decided that I needed to be called on.
Going off to war is already happening to those around them, and often with deadly consequences. In fact, even as this Global Care Force team member named Sasha was hard at work at one of these clinics helping Ukrainians, one of his best friends was being laid to rest.
Just his funeral was day before yesterday. You know, I mean, it's real. Yeah. Yeah.
At every turn, a reminder of just how real the war is, like just outside this church in the Kyiv suburb of Bucha, site of a massacre when the invasion began.
This is where they were buried.
Some 300 Ukrainians buried in a mass grave where this memorial now stands, women and children among them.
Can you imagine?
Some of the nearly 500 people murdered in this town by Russian troops, frustrated the war wasn't going the way they'd hoped.
This person was just 2 years older than me.
Nearby, a memorial erected in their honor, marking the occupation here that lasted from the end of February to the end of March 2022. And even as we take in the monument built in their memory, Lev hears the sounds of war off in the distance.
You heard right now is the air defense systems are trying to shoot drones.
What did it sound like?
It was Ukrainian forces like these blasting one of those 600 combat drones launched by Russia on the week of our visit. Even in a town where they've heard those sounds for going on 3 years now, where neighborhood fences are pocked with bullet holes and the hotel at the end of the street is missing most of its roof from a bomb blast. It still gives you pause that long after the initial invasion, the war is still very much right here.
And still to come, just how many lives were changed by these Colorado volunteers and their teammates during this medical mission? We'll show you when this Fox 31 News special continues after this.
After a week spent in Ukraine helping the people displaced by war, it's time for our Colorado volunteers and their teammates from Global Care Force to pack up and go home. Exhausted and exhilarated at the same time, knowing they've done the best they can to help hundreds of Ukrainians with everyday ailments made worse by the stress of living in a war zone.
They've got a rhythm, they've got a system down, and it's just amazing that this happens month in and month out. In fact, there's 3 young ladies, and I say young, about 6 to 9 years old, that really latched on to some of our volunteers in our team because they were special. They felt as though they were recognized, they were seen, they were known. Over here, it's something very special.
In all, more than 300 Ukrainians got the chance to spend time one-on-one with a medical professional this week and got the medicine they so crucially need to make their life better.
And so to be able to come here every 2 months, offer 2 months of medications for free, consultations for free, they're extremely grateful.
That's because this team of volunteers and donors who care very much about the work they're doing here in Ukraine covered the cost and will again for the next clinic and the next clinics after that, too. Before leaving Ukraine, the volunteers passed by this memorial in Kyiv's Independence Square, filled with thousands of flags and the faces of those killed fighting for their country. And some get one last look at the buildings, homes, and vehicles destroyed over the last 1,000 days.
This widespread damage, one last reminder of the reason they came here to help out, of the lives impacted by the war, and the purpose behind their mission, the reason so many of them want to come back here again. Reporting tonight from near Kyiv, Ukraine, Jeremy Hubbard, Fox 31.